Hey friends, I forgot to make reading wrap-ups for the last 3 months of 2025. I'm not quite sure what happened there. I was a little carried away with all the other videos I was making, all the reading vlogs, I guess, I don't know. But it occurred to me that while I did include many of these books in reading vlogs in those months, and I have talked about many of them, there are a number of books, there are at least a handful of books, let's say that, from the last 3 months of the year that I haven't really given, I think, adequate time to and fully reviewed for you. But I kind of felt like it was going to be boring for me to just sit down and do a traditional standard sit and chat wrap up for 3 whole months of books in one single video. So I thought I would switch it up, make it a little more interesting, make it exciting, and do a tier ranking video for the 31 books that I read in October, November, and December of 2025. And then this way I can sort of go pretty quickly through the books that I've already talked about on my channel and refer you over to videos where I get much more in depth. And then for the books that I have not had a chance to talk about, I can sort of linger for a minute and share my reviews. So that's the plan here. Hopefully you're into it. Hopefully you're excited. I do want to start by giving you a couple basic stats for my reading for the last 3 months of the year, and then introduce you to the tiers, and then we'll just hop right in. So for the last 3 months of 2025, I finished 31 books from 28 different authors. My ratings were actually pretty good for the end of the year. My average rating was 3.84. I think that's very good, actually. Not that far off from 4 stars. Lots of books for me to rave about in there. Obviously, also some books that I didn't like, but I think that overwhelmingly I enjoyed the books I read at the end of 2025, so that's always fun. And then in terms of genre, just to give you a little bit of an idea, I read quite a mix. I would say the number one by far is horror, because I did read a lot of horror around Halloween for spooky season. But we also have some contemporary fiction, historical fiction, literary fiction, one collection of romance short stories, one memoir, and a good amount of fantasy to end off the year. And also one classic, although that was a reread. And also one more thing before I introduce you to the tiers, to make it a little bit simpler for myself and so I don't have to repeat this a million times, I'm going to put a symbol up in the corner of the screen along with a sound effect. So this symbol and sound effect when I read the book for a reading vlog. So you know you can go to the description box and find the link to that reading vlog. It'll all be organized so it's easy to follow along and figure out which reading vlogs are for which books. But that way you can go watch the reading vlog and get a much longer, more in-depth review, including spoilers if you want to watch those, or you can easily skip them because they're all listed and chaptered out for you. And then any book that I included in one of my 3 sort of wrap-up videos for the year, my best, worst, and most disappointing, I will put this symbol and sound effect in the corner. So hopefully this will help. The sound effects I'm including for anyone who doesn't tend to watch the videos. They listen to them more like a podcast while doing other things. That way, hopefully you will know which books are included in other videos and you know to check the description box. But that way I don't have to say that a million times. Okay, so now let me introduce you to the tiers that we have here. I have flipped the colors because it bothers me that the top tier is red and the bottom tier is green. So my S tier, the top tier, is permanently altered my brain chemistry. I feel like this is pretty straightforward, but basically this is books that I not only loved, but they literally have changed me on a fundamental level. I will never be the same now that I have read this book. That is this tier. Next, for the A tier, I have no notes. No notes? No notes. I think it's from New Girl. I've never watched New Girl. I just love this meme so much. It is relevant so often. It's one of my most used memes. And it is perfect for this tier, which is for also 5-star reads, but 5-star reads that they maybe didn't permanently alter my brain chemistry, but they're still perfect books with no notes that I absolutely love. So that's this tier. Then we have the B tier, which is a very respectable 4 for very respectable 4-star reads. Pretty self-explanatory. Then we have the C tier, and this tier is, this was undeniably a book. For books that are on their books. That's about all I have to say. This is for 3-star books that are fine, that are good, but don't necessarily elicit any kind of huge reaction in me one way or the other. They exist, and that is nice. So that's this tier. Then we have the D tier, which is, it's complicated, I fear. This is for books that, it's complicated. Again, pretty self-explanatory, but this is more for the 3-star reads that I felt so much internal conflict in trying to rate and review them that I have such mixed feelings about. It's not a 3-star in the sense of like, this book exists and is fine and is good. cool. That's it. It's 3 stars in the sense of there are some aspects of this that I absolutely loved, or the premise was so cool, or it had so much potential, but then the execution was a total letdown, or I loved the beginning and hated the end, or vice versa. Like just books that end up as a 3-star read, but in a much more conflicted way. It's complicated, I fear. Then we have the E tier, I believe, which is it's not you, it's me. It might also be you, which is for books that are, I think it's more so a thing of them just not being for me, not being my cup of tea. But I also wanted to leave the door open to the books that it is more their fault. It's not really for me, but also the book was not giving what it should have been giving. So this is mostly for 2-star reads, this tier. And then our final tier, the F tier, is the simple yet effective, absolutely not. Absolutely not. This tier is exclusively for books that I hated, pretty much. I tend to be reticent to give out 1-star ratings. So pretty much exclusively, if I'm giving a 1-star, it's because I hated the book. So absolutely not. And those are the tiers. That's what we're working with. Also, even though I uploaded these in the order I read them, they showed up in a random order, which is annoying. I am going to try to go in the order that I read them for my own brain, but that means I'm going to be randomly selecting them from the bottom here, and you're not going to know what's coming next. And maybe that's fun for you. I don't know. Keep the mystery alive in this relationship. So let's get into it. So starting with the first book that I finished in October, which was Woodworking by Emily St. James. And this was our book club pick for September. So I finished it at the start of October. And this is a book about a late bloomer trans woman who is a teacher, a high school teacher, and she has only come to terms with her identity, figured out that she is trans now in her 30s. And she's really going through it because she lives in a small town. There are no other trans people around her except for one trans student who is just transferred to their school. She doesn't have anyone to talk to about this. She recently broke up with her partner and she's feeling really overwhelmed by, trying to reckon with this as an adult and also try to figure out how she can move forward because she feels like her whole life will fall apart if she lives openly as herself, but she also is struggling so much with the dysphoria and doesn't know how she'll go on hiding who she is from the world. And this is very much inspired by the author's own life, or sort of taken from the author's own lived experience as someone who came out as trans later in life. And this book both follows Erica, our protagonist, who's in her mid-30s, and Abigail, who is in high school, and she's the only trans kid at the school, and she's 17. And they develop a friendship that kind of crosses boundaries because they are teacher and student, but in the dynamic of their friendship, Abigail is very much the big sister, the mentor for Erica, who is just going through this sort of second puberty experience, and it sort of muddies the water with the dynamics there. And they feel like they have to hide their friendship because no one else knows that Erica is trans. And it's just a really interesting dynamic. And I really, really liked this book. So Woodworking for me was a great, great read. I personally, I don't know. You know what? Well, listen, I might, as we go on, I might change some of these slightly. I think for now, I'm going to put Woodworking into no notes. This was a 5-star read for me. It was amazing. I thought it was really, really good. I loved that the characters were very complex. I loved that their relationships were messy and realistic. I loved the way that the book, both the ebook, I read the ebook and listened to the audiobook simultaneously, both handled basically redacting Erica's dead name in a way that I found was very, very effective. In the ebook, they're just fully redacted black boxes. So you'll flip to a page and just see how many times she was being dead named. And it was really visually intense and effective, I think, at really making it even more obvious to you as the reader how often people were dead naming her and how hard that was for her. And then in the audiobook, it sort of was static to redact her dead name. And that also was super effective because it really sort of cuts through the dialogue every time and makes you pay attention to how often it's happening. And I think that was more effective than actually including her dead name because it draws your attention to it more. And Erica would notice it so intensely every single time. And I think that allows the reader to also feel that frequency and intensity. And it also feels super respectful to Erica, even though she's a fictional character, that her dead name is never used on the page. There is dead naming of another character, unfortunately, on page, but it is treated as something really terrible. And it was also handled well, I think, within the narrative of the story. But I loved this. I thought it was really, really great. I thought it was well written. I was very emotional. I was very invested in these character stories. I loved how messy and real they were. And I really, really enjoyed reading it. So I would highly recommend. This is contemporary fiction and it's really good. So next I read The Hounding by Xenobe Purvis. And this one I loved as well. This is historical fiction about 5 sisters who live in this small town in the UK with their grandfather. And they live just outside of town. And they have been raised to be their own people, to follow their own interests, and that sort of backfires on them because they are seen as outsiders in the town. They're seen as not feminine enough, not friendly enough, like they're holier than thou because they don't always smile at every townsman they see. The townsfolk are suspicious of them, and it ends up escalating when one man from the town starts telling people that he saw them turn into dogs. And the fear and hysteria grows from there. And I thought this was really, really great. I loved this, gave it 5 stars. I thought the writing was really lovely. I loved the depiction of the 5 girls and their sisterhood, their various relationships and that dynamic. I loved the relationships they had with their grandfather and the way that he thought about and sort of reflected on the way he raised them, and maybe that he set them up for failure by allowing them to dream that they could be and do anything, which was heartbreaking. I thought the depiction of mob violence and fear of the other was really well done. Anyway, there's a reading vlog, so I won't get too carried away, but I really loved this. I thought it was great, and this one is also going into no notes. Then I finished The Staircase in the Woods by Chuck Wendig. This is horror, and this is a group of friends who, when they were teens, found a random staircase in the woods, and one of their friends went up it, and when he got to the top, he disappeared, and they never saw him again. And now they're back together as adults, and their lives have diverged, and they find another staircase in the woods, and they decide to investigate. And I really didn't like this. I really didn't like this. I didn't like the characters. I didn't think they were realistic. I didn't like their relationships. I thought that this was way too focused on shock value and trauma porn and just suffering for suffering's sake. I didn't think it made a lot of sense. I had a bad time. I didn't like this. So for me, this is absolutely not. Absolutely not. No. What a waste of a premise to have a staircase in the woods and then this be the book that comes out of it. Next was our buddy read for the 3rd quarter of the year. My buddy read on Patreon reads a book every 3 months. And this was Girl, Woman, Other by Bernadine Evaristo. I think our prompt for this was a book that won an award. This won the International Booker Prize. I loved this book. I thought it was fantastic. This is a book about many women living in the UK, specifically Black women and one non-binary person living in the UK and their experiences. And I just thought it was so well done. I felt it wove together their stories in a really beautiful way. There's a lot of heart and humor, but also grappling with real difficult issues and racism, internalized misogyny, just some really complex dynamics. There are abusive relationships depicted in this book, just really runs the gambit, but is also really beautiful and very heartwarming is maybe the wrong word. I mean, there are moments that are heartwarming, but I was just very emotionally invested. I really cared about these characters. I was so in it from the beginning. And I feel like Bernadine Evaristo did such a great job of depicting so many very different characters with very different lived experiences. And all of them felt real. And I felt like all of them had enough time. And I never once was frustrated moving from one point of view to another, which I think is quite hard to balance. I just think it was gorgeous. It's very clear why it won the International Booker Prize. It's an amazing book. I would highly, highly recommend. Again, both Permanently Altered by Brain Chemistry and No Notes are 5-star categories. It's just like absolutely all time, very, 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 very favorite, will never be the same, and like regular 5-star, which were fantastic and amazing and I'll think about for a very long time. I might change my mind on these, but for now, I'm gonna try not to overthink it. I feel like I'm remembering why I haven't done that many tier ranking videos because it feels like I'm having to re-rank and decide even though I already rated them. So I'm bad at making decisions, but it's fine. Next, I read We Used to Live Here by Marcus Cleaver. This is a book that has been everywhere. This is horror thriller. I feel like it is kind of more of a thriller, but I've seen it mostly categorized as horror, so I guess I'll call it horror. But to me, it read a little bit more like a thriller. And this book is about Eve and her wife Charlie, who just bought this old stately home on the top of a hill, and their plan is to slowly work on renovating it, fixing it up, and selling it. So their plan is to flip this house and make a profit. Charlie is off getting supplies, running errands, something like that, and Eve is home alone with their dog. And someone knocks on the door, and it happens to be this family. And the dad of the family says he used to live in this house. And is it okay if they come in and look around? And he can show his kids and his wife his childhood home. And Eve wants to say no, relatable, but she ends up letting them in because she's a people pleaser, also relatable. And then they won't leave. And things get weird. And it's one of those books where you don't 100% know how much is in Eve's mind and what is actually real. And I won't say too much more because I don't want to spoil it. This one had its genesis on the Reddit No Sleep, and I feel like you can kind of tell, but I did like it. I thought it was engaging. I thought it was interesting, had a really cool premise. I did, however, think it did too much. It tried to be all the things at once. It tried to do all the scary things at once and include so many different tropes and callbacks to famous movies. And it just was a little disjointed or chaotic, I think. I think it would have been more effective if it was a little bit more focused, but I did really like it. So I think for me, We Used to Live Here is going to go into a respectable 4. Then I read Graveyard Shift by ML Rio, and this one was a disappointment for me. I had really high expectations, and this one it was fine. And this book is about an unlikely group of acquaintances, maybe friends, who tend to meet up at night in the local cemetery, because of course they do. And one night they witness someone burying something in a freshly dug grave. And they decide it's time to investigate. And it turns out that there's more going on in this town than just the suspicious activity of one mysterious person burying something in a graveyard under a veil of darkness. So this one is going to go, well, no, honestly, this one's going to go into, this was undeniably a book because I didn't care enough about it to really have that much to say. I mean, in the full review, in the reading vlog, I do give more details as to why I found it disappointing and it didn't quite work for me, but I don't really feel that mixed about it. I don't have high highs and low lows. It was a book that I read. It exists. And so do I. So that's that. Then I have a reread. I reread the second book in the Clan of the Cave Bear series by Jean M. Auel, The Valley of the Horses. This is a series I read for the first time as a very young child, probably too young, and have reread many, many, many times. It's a comfort read. It's a comfort series, and I was reading it for comfort, listening to the audiobook at night to fall asleep. This one is permanently altered my brain chemistry, but it permanently altered my brain chemistry when I read it the first time. I wouldn't say that this most recent reread permanently altered my brain chemistry, but I also think I've read this book approximately 500 times, and I'm not exaggerating, so I'm not sure it could still permanently alter my brain chemistry. I know every moment inside and out. I do actually genuinely think that this book is part of why I eventually went vegan as a 20-year-old and have stayed vegan ever since. I've been vegan for 13 years, and I think this is part of the reason. I think this book changed my brain chemistry in the most literal way possible. So anyway, this is a prehistoric series where our main character is a human, and she is living at the same time as Neanderthals, and this traumatic event happens, this natural disaster, and she is left alone, and she ends up being adopted by or taken care of by a group of Neanderthals, and a specific woman sort of adopts her and becomes her mother, and she grows up with them. And then in the second book, I won't spoil anything from the first book, but she is traveling on her own, sort of on a journey, and she finds this valley and decides to stop there for a time because it seems like a good place to rest through the winter. And there are horses that frequent this valley, and she bonds with this horse, and it's very much an insular story of her and sort of processing some losses and some grief that she has experienced in her life. It's a very reflective book, and we also have a secondary story, a second point of view with these two men who are brothers who are going on a long journey and what they're experiencing and the people they're meeting. So we kind of alternate between the two. I don't even know if people who don't have nostalgic goggles would like this book in this series at all, but I love it. It will always be close to my heart. Not the later books in the series, those get pretty bad, but the first few are close to my heart. And this is my favorite of the series, The Valley of the Horses. So permanently altered my brain chemistry. Then I read Nestlings by Nat Cassidy, and this one, also in a reading vlog. I really liked this one. I definitely had some notes, so it's not going to go in the no notes tier. There were some things I had to say about it. This one, how do I blurb it without spoiling anything? Young couple who have had their first child, and the woman had a really difficult childbirth experience and ended up needing to use a wheelchair. So they're transitioning, they're adjusting to her being in a wheelchair and also being new parents and having a baby. And they're living in New York City where housing is very expensive, and they see this opportunity to move into this really nice building because they have this lottery system to occasionally let in people of lower income and sort of subsidize their rent. So they move into this beautiful building, and then things in the building start to get weird. And that's all I'll say about that. I thought this was really good. For the most part, I did not like the ending. I didn't hate the ending so much that it ruined the whole book for me, but I didn't like the ending. I thought it was a weird choice, personally. So for me, I'm trying to, where is this even? Oh, here it is. So for me, Nestlings was a very respectable 4. I had a good time with it, but definitely had notes. A couple. Next, we have one of my absolute favorite reads of the year, not to spoil it ahead of time, but Bat Eaters and Other Names for Corazang by Kylie Lee Baker. This was both in a reading vlog and in my best books of the year. I loved this book. This is a book about a young Asian American, Chinese American. She's mixed. I believe it was her mom was white, but she is living in New York City in 2020, and she's experiencing a lot of racism and witnessing a lot of racism and hate crimes aimed at Asian Americans. And she also had a pretty traumatic experience and lost a family member and is really going through it with her grief. And there's a really nice balance here of real grounded human horror of people just being absolutely terrible to each other in the most unimaginable ways, and also a bit of supernatural horror. And all the way through, we have this through line of grief and processing that. And I just thought so much of this was amazing. The main character also has OCD, and from what I've seen from viewers who also have OCD, the rep was really well done. I just think this book was incredible, and it's really stayed with me on such a fundamental level. So you maybe can guess, but I think this is going to be the first one, other than my reread, that's going to go into permanently altered my brain chemistry. I loved this book so much. I thought it was amazing, and I would highly, highly, highly recommend it. There is one scene in this book that I still think about on a very regular basis. It haunts me in the best way. So permanently altered my brain chemistry. Next, I have one that's going to make people mad at me. Alone with You in the Ether by Olivia Blake. I read this for my Read It or Unhaul It challenge, and I was really hoping to love this book, but I've had mixed experiences with Olivia Blake, and I talk about this more in that video. That video ended up being a dedicated video for this book because it actually took me a long time to read it and to get through it. This one was rough for me for many reasons, and I don't even think I could begin to summarize them here. There's just too much, so please go watch that video if you want to hear my thoughts. Basically, this book is following these two characters who randomly run into each other, and one of them suggests that they have 6 conversations to get to know each other, and they do these 6 conversations, and their relationship proceeds from there. And I could put this in the it's not you, it's me. It might also be you, but honestly, no, absolutely not. This was an absolutely not for me. I had a very bad time, and me from the past will tell you in detail, if you watch that video, why I had a very bad time, but it was not for me. No, thank you. No, ma'am. Then I read Myra by Nikki Gonzalez. This was an arc that I had, and I picked it up on a whim for my Halloween horror reading vlog, because it was also horror and I hadn't gotten around to it yet, and I had the arc, and I was very, very, very pleasantly surprised. I really liked this book. It was weird. I think a lot of people maybe won't like this book because not a huge amount happens, and it is very sort of ambiguous, and it's very odd, and it's much more about the oppressive atmosphere than anything else, but I really loved this. So in this book, basically we have our protagonist whose childhood best friend, Myra, moved away for school, and she's back near their hometown for a weekend, and she invites her childhood best friend to come hang out with her in this house that she's staying in, kind of in the middle of nowhere. And our protagonist was kind of always obsessed with Myra, and it very heavily implied, if not just outright stated, in the book that she was in love with Myra. So she can't turn her down, even though they're a bit estranged. They haven't really seen each other in a long time. And she goes to this house kind of in the middle of nowhere, and it turns out that it's not just going to be her and Myra. It's her and Myra's sort of odd NPC boyfriend. And it turns out this house is not what she expected, and the boyfriend is not what she expected, and Myra is maybe not the way she remembered, and things get weird. Things get weird. I really liked this. I thought it was fantastic. I had a great time. So for me, Myra is going into no notes. No notes? No notes. Because I have no notes. It was great. Go read it. Then I read Pet Sematary by Stephen King again. This book was so much more than I expected, so much better than I expected. I've read a good amount of Stephen King now. I mean, he has a huge catalog, so I have a lot more to read still, but I do have a whole reading vlog where I'm exploring a bunch of his popular fiction. I've read more of his stuff kind of over time, and I really like a lot of his books. I actually am more of a fan of Stephen King than I expected to be, but this is my favorite Stephen King that I have ever read. This book came at just the right time for me. This is a book completely about grief and how it really messes you up, and I was grieving. I'm still grieving now, but I was like really in it at this time. And this book broke me into a million pieces. And I just thought it was so well done. It's very visceral. It's terrifying. It's heartbreaking. It was amazing. And this book, again, try not to spoil it, even though it's a pretty old book. And I think a lot of people have read it or have seen an adaptation or are just kind of aware of what this book is about. But basically, we have a young family, parents and 2 kids, and their cat, and they move to a new town because the dad got a new job, and they're warned to be careful both of the highway that's out front of their house that's dangerous, that has trucks going by, and also of this burial ground sort of out back of their house. You know from pretty early on what's going to happen, but that only makes it scarier. And there are a few conventions used, some things that King does that really amp up the tension and the emotion and just made it even more intense for me. And it really is so much about loss and grief. How many of our values or beliefs we would be willing to eschew for the people we love. And it's just devastating. Me from a few years ago would never believe you if you told me that I would feel this way about a book by Stephen King, but this permanently altered my brain chemistry. It was incredible. I still get very choked up and emotional when I think too long about this book. I'm trying right now to really compartmentalize. But if you want to see me very emotional, watch the reading vlog. This was amazing. 5 stars. Okay, now we're getting into November, and the first book I finished in November, once again, it typically is whatever our book club pick is, because I usually read it right at the end of the month and at the beginning of the next month before our discussion. And this was a reread this time. It was Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and I love this book. This is a favorite classic of mine. I think it's so readable. I think the character work is really well done. The eerie atmosphere is amazing. The premise here is that our protagonist, who is unnamed, is on vacation with the woman that she's working as companion for, and they run into this wealthy widower, and they end up hitting it off and getting married, and he brings her home to his estate. And when she gets there, she very quickly feels the presence of his late wife, Rebecca, feels that Rebecca just permeates everything, and constantly feels like the servants and friends of her new husband and people who live in, on their lands are comparing her to Rebecca. And she starts to become a little obsessive about this figure of Rebecca. And as the book goes on, we learn more about what happened to Rebecca. There's definitely this mystery thriller, lots of tension aspect to this book, but also just this growing dread and the really heavy, oppressive atmosphere. Several characters feel like they're being haunted in a way. And I just love this book. I think it's great. I'm a huge fan. I loved it the first time I read it. I loved it the second time I read it. And I think I'm going to put this one also in permanently altered my brain chemistry. Again, this would be more the first time I read it that it did the altering, but I think so. I think so. This is one of my favorite classics of all time. I love Rebecca. Go read it if you haven't read it. It's It's fantastic. Then I read The Good House by Tananarive Due. I was originally, this along with a few more horror novels on this list, I thought I was going to put into a reading vlog for you. And then I ended up getting really busy with other videos and the end of the year. And then enough time had passed since I read the first couple books that I had intended for this reading vlog that they weren't as fresh. And I ended up scrapping the video, unfortunately. But I did really like this book. So I have read one other book by Tananarive Due. I read The Reformatory, which was incredible, fantastic, 5 stars. Go read that book. I think I read it last year. How do I blurb this without spoiling anything? It's basically a woman who has moved away for her professional life, and then her grandmother passes, I believe, and she goes back to her grandmother's house to either move in and live there or maybe to prep the house and sell it. I don't think she's decided yet at that point, but there's always been sort of an energy to the house, something maybe supernatural about it, and the book sort of follows some events that maybe possibly were caused by the house. I don't know. I liked this a lot. I thought it was really well done. I feel like the pacing was a bit off for me personally. I felt like the ending was a bit rushed after a very drawn out beginning. And I didn't mind the pacing of the beginning, but then the ending was so quick for me and things were wrapped up a little bit too perfectly. And my initial reaction was kind of to hate the ending. I do think with a little bit more time and reflection, I've ended up coming around to the ending a little bit more. But when I first read the book, when I first finished it, I was very mad about the ending and I didn't like it. So I think maybe that's relevant as a reaction. Like I said, I have kind of come around to the ending a little bit more, but I don't know. It felt a little convenient for me. I also didn't love how this book handled sex for a bunch of different characters and including stories of characters having really questionable, if not just outright illegal interactions with other people and like very explicitly so. And I'm not sure in any of these cases that it was tied enough into the themes or the larger plot. Like they all kind of felt random and unnecessary, but were disturbing. And I just don't know. I don't know why. I found it odd. So anyway, I did like this overall quite a bit. I got really emotional at a few key moments. I was pretty invested in these characters and what was going to happen to them, but it wasn't as much of an all-time favorite, absolute amazing read for me personally as The Reformatory. So for me, The Good House is going to go into a very respectable 4. Then I read The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. This is another horror novel, and I've read from Stephen Graham Jones before. And this one was really cool. It's historical fiction and horror. We have a modern day character, and the journals of her great-great-great-grandfather have been found. So she's reading these in the modern day, and she's an academic and trying to think of how she could kind of work this into her academic career. We also read the journals of her she calls him her greatest grandfather in the book, and see what's happening to him. And he's a pastor in the sort of new West, and maybe has some sort of a hidden past that he's not divulging. And then we also have the third protagonist, who is an Indigenous man, Good Stab, who comes to a service with Greatest Grandpa and asks if he can sit and give him confession. And Greatest Grandpa's like, we don't really do confession here. We're not Catholic, but sure. And then Good Stab tells the pastor his life story. And I loved this. This is my favorite Stephen Graham Jones book to date. Really, really fantastic. I think Stephen Graham Jones' writing style works best as an audiobook, being told to you like a story, because he so often writes in that way and his characters often are telling their story verbally to someone. So it's just really great to hear the narration. I loved all 3 points of view. I thought they were all really interesting. I do think this had a few pacing issues, but they were pretty minor in the grand scheme of things, and I really loved the direction it went in, and the ending was fantastic, and I really liked it. I thought it was great. So for me, I'm conflicted. It feels a little untrue to put it in no notes, because I do technically think the pacing was a little off in the middle, but I also loved it and gave it 5 stars. So I'm not going to put it in a very respectable 4. I backed myself into a corner with these names. I think I'm going to put it for now into no notes, even though I technically have 1 note. It's a very minor note. It's like nitpicking. It's a really great book though. Highly, highly recommend. All right, next I read another book for the reading vlog that never was. I apologize again. Victorian Psycho by Virginia Fato. And this one, sadly, unfortunately, Did not work for me. I will refer you to my worst books of the year video for more details, but basically the premise here is that we're in the Victorian era, as one might imagine, and our protagonist is, as one might imagine, a psycho. She is hired to be the caretaker for young children in a family, and she is not good with kids and also should not be trusted with kids, and things progress from there. This book is meant to be funny. The humor didn't work for me. I found it to be trying too hard and gross just to be gross. And I found the harm towards children too much to take personally. It just felt excessive. Kind of like Staircase in the Woods, where it just felt like it was pain and suffering and gore just cuz to shock and appall you. And I didn't have a good time. For me, Victorian Psycho, I mean, like, in some ways I think this isn't the book, it's me. It just didn't work for me, but other people really enjoyed the humor and it worked for them. So it feels a little unfair to put it in absolutely not. But for me personally, it was an absolutely not. So I'm going to put it there because this is my personal ranking. All of this is just very subjective, but absolutely not for me personally. Then yet another one for the horror reading vlog that never was, Diavola by Jennifer Thorne. This one is about a woman who has a pretty complicated relationship with her family, and they do a yearly family vacation, and this year they're in Italy, and when they get there, the place they're staying in doesn't seem quite right, and they seem to be losing hours and days, and weird creepy things are happening, and they're fighting as they always do, and things escalate. I really liked the first part of this, but the second half didn't work as well for me. I do love that it feels like the true horror here is this messed up family dynamic and how much they all hate each other and throw each other under the bus, even though there is other stuff going on that's horrifying. I thought that was interesting. And there were some really great moments, but I don't know. It was a little messy for me. It didn't quite land the way I think it was intended to. And like I said, the second half kind of slowed down and lost a lot of the tension that was built in the first half because we changed setting and stopped being within this group of people and we're basically just with our protagonist. And the ending was I think it was a bit convenient for me personally. So I guess I'll put it in It's Complicated, I Fear, not because I liked it less than Graveyard Shift, for example. They're both 3-star reads, but just because rather than having like really no feelings or opinion about it whatsoever, I really liked some parts of it. And then other parts I just really felt didn't work. And I have pretty mixed feelings about it overall. So it's complicated. Then I have another book that I read for my Read It or Unhaul It series. So that is The Doctor's Sweetheart by Ella Montgomery. And this is a short story collection, mostly pretty much exclusively romances and historical. I mean, they're in a historical setting because Ella Montgomery was writing, a century ago. I really liked a few of these stories, really hated a few of these stories, and thought some of them were fine. But the ones I hated, I really hated. Check out the reading vlog for a little bit more detail on that. But like I said in that video, I don't think I would recommend this to anyone just because it is such a mixed bag. In that video, I list my favorite stories and the ones I would specifically recommend. So check that out if you're a fan of Ella Montgomery and you want to know which stories I would say are worth your time. But several of these stories I thought were pretty terrible. And one in particular is a grooming relationship, but romanticized, and just that's going to be a no from me. That particular story 100% would go into absolutely not, but this collection as a whole, for me personally, is going to go into It's Complicated, I Fear. High highs and very, very low lows, and then a lot of very meh in the middle. A very mixed bag for me personally. Then we have Among the Burning Flowers by Samantha Shannon. This is one of the sequels I read for a reading vlog in November. I'd already read the previous 2 books in the series, so I expected to love this one as well. And I did really like it, but it wasn't quite as good for me as the other 2, in part just because I think it was too short. I think we needed more time with these characters, but I did still really like it. The premise here, I mean, this is a prequel or The Priory of the Orange Tree, but this is essentially a world that is sort of medieval in its development, and there are dragons, and this book follows the sort of initial rebirth of these dragons that have been trapped for a very long time. Priory starts a few years after this, so it's sort of dealing with the fallout a little bit later on, but this is when they first wake back up, and it takes place in different countries than Priory. So we get to see some different perspectives and how some different characters dealt with it, and we also get to learn more about characters that are in Priory but are more minor characters there. We get more of their background in this book, and I really liked that. I liked all the characters. I liked getting more from them. I did feel like this book could have been longer, and I also felt like one of the 3 point of view characters needed way more time. She had like 2 chapters, and I was really into her story and her relationship, and I wanted more from her, and then she just disappeared and never came back, and I took that personally. So for me, Among the Burning Flowers was really great, but it is a 4-star read. A very respectable 4. I liked it a lot. It's definitely worth a read. I will probably reread it in the future because it's part of one of my favorite series of all time, but I definitely prefer The Priory of the Orange Tree and A Day of Fallen Night to Among the Burning Flowers, just for me personally. But again, more details in that reading vlog if you want them. Then I finished Subdivision by J. Robert Lennon, also for my Read It Orrin Hallett series. And this one I really liked. This is a very weird book, definitely weird lit, and is more literary and more reflective. It's a bit of a puzzle of a book that you try to piece together as you read it. And the book starts, I can't say too much without giving things away, but the book starts with our protagonist who has sort of woken up in this town. She doesn't know anything about her past. She doesn't know how she got here. She doesn't know what she's doing here, but she is determined to find a place to live and get a job and to live her life. And she's trying to figure out how to do that while also being pressured by the 2 women who own the bed and breakfast she is staying at to put together this puzzle. And they're very invested in her putting together the puzzle. And the puzzle seems tied to her past somehow. And things are very strange, and can't say too much else, but I really liked this a lot. I thought it was really great. I did want a little bit more at the end. I liked the ending, and it made sense to me, but I wish we'd had a little bit more time for the sort of emotional resolution of our protagonist's arc there. But I really liked it. It was weird, and I like weird. So for me, this is a very respectable 4. I had a good time with it. Then another book I read for my sequels reading vlog, and this was We Love You Bunny by Mona Awad. This is a book that so many people have hated. So many people who loved Bunny hated this, and I don't understand. Like I said, this is, well, it's a prequel to Bunny and also kind of a sequel, covering the year before the year that Bunny takes place, but from the bunny's perspectives instead of from Sam's perspective. And it's very weird, it's very odd, but also dives much more into the bunny's internal dynamic in a way that I found really engaging. I also thought it was funny, and there was a new character introduced who had their own point of view chapters, and I really loved their chapters. And I understand what people are saying when they say that they didn't feel like this book was necessary, because it definitely wasn't. Bunny stands on its own. And I can also kind of understand why people say or feel that this book sort of removed the mystery from Bunny, but I personally don't think that this book is definitive in any way. I think it still leaves the door open for your own interpretation. I don't think that it is saying the way that they're telling the story is 100% how it happened. It was very clear to me anyway. It seemed to me, my interpretation was that they could easily be lying about all of this because a lot of it just makes no sense and would be very in line with their dynamic, that they would be lying about these things. So I don't think that it ruins the mystery of Bunny. And while it definitely didn't need to exist, I enjoyed it anyway. So for me personally, We Love You Bunny is no notes. I know that's a very unpopular opinion. Lots of people hate this book, but I like it. I liked it a lot. I thought it was great. I had fun with it, and I gave it 5 stars. So that's me. You can hear more of my thoughts, including spoilers, in the reading vlog if you want more reasons why I loved it, but I did love it. And the third book I read for that same video was The Strength of the Few by James Islington. I liked The Will of the Many quite a bit. I did have a lot of qualms, but overall I really liked it. I think I gave it 4 stars. For me, this one was just significantly less fun. Very not my thing. It tries to do something really creative and has these 3 perspectives with 3 different settings, and I really didn't like it. I didn't think it was well handled, jumping between the 3. I feel like every time I started to get into one of them, we would jump to another one. This is a fantasy world inspired by Roman culture and has sort of this hierarchical magical system. And the magic system was the most interesting thing to me in the world building in the first book. And the first book underexplored it, but there were reasons. And I really hoped that in book 2, we would explore it more. But then because of this experimental thing that Islington was doing, we again didn't explore the world building or the magic system in the way I hoped. And I was finding it very frustrating. I also didn't really appreciate how the female characters are treated in this book in particular. In the whole series, I'm not the biggest fan. In this book in particular, I really didn't like it. In reading this, I realized that this series is not for me, and I'm not going to continue. I'm DNFing the series. So for me, this is going to go into, it's not you, it's me. It might also be you, because lots of people love this. Lots of people are raving, giving it 5 stars. Happy for them. Happy for you if you're one of those people. So glad you loved it. It's not for me. And it might be me. That's the problem in this case. It's just a mismatch of tastes. But also a little bit, I do think the book has a part to play. But anyway, check out that reading vlog for way, way, way more in-depth thoughts, including spoilers, if you're interested in that. Next, I read Private Rights by Julia Armfield. This was also for a reading vlog. And the premise here is that we have 3 sisters who have just lost their father, and they're a bit, maybe estranged is taking it a little far, but they don't have a super close relationship. They have a pretty complicated dynamic, and they're having to come together to deal with the estate of their father and the funeral and everything, and what to do with his house. And this takes place in a near future, in the midst of the apocalypse sort of setting. It's in London, but it's in a near future where London is being flooded. And so people have to live in high rises or in really fancy single family homes that are kind of on stilts to lift them above water. And you have to take like gondolas or ferries from street to street because you can't take public transit because the streets are flooded. But even though the world is ending, they're all just going about their lives like nothing's happening, and everyone's going to their minimum wage job as a barista, because what else are you going to do? You still have to pay your bills even though the world is ending. I've seen this described as literary fiction, as horror, as sci-fi. I think it's a blend of all of them. It's really a story about grief and love and sibling relationships, and I loved this so much. Not to spoil my best books of the year video, but this was my favorite book of the year. I loved it so, so much. And so you're probably not surprised that it is going right into Permanently Altered My Brain Chemistry. I loved this book so much. I sobbed so hard so many times while reading it. I think it cuts so deep and is so accurate in depicting sibling relationships, sister dynamics, relationships like father-daughter dynamics. And even though, like I said in my review, my relationship with my sister is not like any of these relationships, my relationship with my dad isn't like any of these relationships, it still felt so relatable to me in so many moments. And I think Julia Armfield has this great ability to write really gorgeous lyrical prose that's also very understated and not overwrought at all. I think it kind of goes under the radar how gorgeous her writing is because it is very naturalistic and restrained, but it's also just so gorgeous. And this book, both books I've read by her now, very atmospheric and eerie. And there's this sort of very heavy, in this case, very moist, because the world is being flooded, atmosphere where everything's kind of dreary and wet. And actually, her other book is very wet too. Lots of moist books, but they're great. Highly recommend. I loved this. I loved it so much. Check out the reading vlog for even more thoughts, again, including spoilers, if you want that. But this was my favorite book of the year. And then I have another reread. Like I said, I finished Among the Burning Flowers by Samantha Shannon, and then I immediately wanted to read The Priory of the Orange Tree once again. So I did. So this was a reread. I've talked about this book before. I think it's in my favorite fantasy books of all time video, if I'm not misremembering. I really love this series. I really love this book. And for me, this is I'm second guessing myself because this is one of my favorite fantasy series of all time. Does this go and permanently alter my brain chemistry or just no notes? I say just no notes when no notes is like amazing 5-star reads that I love. I think Priory goes in no notes because my favorite book in the series is actually A Day of Fallen Night, the 500 Years in the Past prequel. I'm going back here because it's back here somewhere. I actually don't know where it is. Oh, never mind. It's out of frame. It's right here. Anyway, that one is my favorite. So that one probably goes and permanently altered my brain chemistry, and this one goes in no notes, I think. But it's dicey. I could easily put Priory into permanently altered my brain chemistry and feel fine about it. It's amazing. Highly recommend. Sapphic, dragons, politics, incredible world building and incorporation of religion in such an impeccable way. Samantha Shannon's brain is ridiculous. I love it so much. Go read it right now. Now we're getting into December, final month of the year, and the first thing I read, once again, was our book club pick, as always, pretty much. And our pick for November had been The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. And I think our prompt for this month was LGBTQIA plus fantasy, which this is. It's fantasy with a sapphic romance. And I've seen different people describe this differently. I've seen some people call this romantasy, but I really don't think that's accurate because the romance is pretty minor. I mean, it's there, but I don't know. I don't think that I don't feel like this follows the structure of a romance novel. It definitely feels like a fantasy novel that has a prominent romance happening. So maybe fantasy romance. Anyway, the premise here basically is that one of our main characters, Melanie, is a princess and her brother has just ascended to the throne. And in their culture, they sacrifice women, or women sacrifice themselves on a pyre to their gods to sort of protect their land, essentially, to give their land this magical fire. And her brother is trying to force her to go on the pyre and she is not having it. And part of their religion is that it has to be voluntary. And because she's not giving her consent to do it, he can't force her. And so he exiles her to one of the lands that they had colonized at one point to sort of live basically in confinement until she comes around to the idea of sacrificing herself on the pyre. Basically, that's the only choice he's leaving for her. Our other protagonist, Priya, is working as a servant in the home of sort of the magistrate. I think he's the magistrate or the mayor or governor or something like that, as a servant to his wife, Bhumika, who is also has some point of view chapters, but she's more of a minor protagonist. Priya and Malini are the main two. And Priya is working as a servant in the house, and she's assigned to work as a maid for the princess in exile, and they get to know each other. I really enjoyed the romance. I really liked the development of that. I liked the characters a lot. I liked Bhumika, but she, again, was much more minor in this book. I think that she is much stronger in the second book. I have, since I read this first book, read the rest of the series, and I think Bhumika gets more interesting in book 2. I really liked Priya and Melanie in this first book. I really liked the romance. I really liked the world building. It was very cool, and especially the way that religion is handled. There are several religions. I think there are 3 main religions that we explore, and all of them are very well developed and really fascinating. And the magic is also very cool. My main issue with this book and with the rest of the series, to be honest, is there are too many other points of view that are unnecessary. We don't just get Malini, Priya, and Bhumika. We also get, in this book, probably less than the next 2. I feel like the problem escalates in later books in the series, but we get so many other points of view, and often points of view that are one-offs where we meet a character for one chapter and that's it. And we just don't have to do that. And I found it a bit jarring because every time I'm trying to figure out, who is this character? How are they connected to everything else? Why do I care about them? We're learning about this event that happens and then we never see them again. And I found that frustrating. Personally, I would have rather just hear about those through the other characters. I don't think they needed to all have their own points of view, but I really liked this book a lot and I gave it a very respectable 4. And I obviously enjoyed it enough to read on in the series because that's what I did. Then next, I read a full trilogy for a reading vlog, so you can check it out here. This was trying Robin Hobb for the first time, because I'd actually never read anything from Robin Hobb. I know, ridiculous. And I read the whole Farseer trilogy in that video. So Assassin's Apprentice, Royal Assassin, and Assassin's Quest. And because I have a whole reading vlog specifically for that trilogy that you can go watch, I'm going to be so brief about this, but I really liked this trilogy a lot, enough that I'm planning on making a reading vlog for the next trilogy in this larger series, the Live Ship Traders. I really fell in love with it. I had a great time. Basically, the premise here is we're following Fitz, who is a young boy who is the bastard of the eldest heir to the throne, and he's brought to the local keep by his mother's father, who says he exists because of the prince can take care of him, and he's taken under the wing of the man who is in charge of the stables. He's eventually trained to be, as you could probably guess from the title, to be an assassin, because that is the way that they believe he can best serve his family and the crown as an illegitimate child who is related to the royal family. So anyway, I won't get too into it because, again, I have a whole reading vlog specifically for just this trilogy, so check that out if you want to hear more. Again, spoilers that you can watch or skip, easily marked. But Assassin's Apprentice for me was a very respectable 4. I really had a great time with it. Both Royal Assassin and Assassin's Quest were 5-star reads for me, and I think they both go into no notes. I loved them both so much. Did either of them alter my brain chemistry? I don't know. Maybe if I'd read them at a little bit of a younger age, they would have. I've read so much fantasy at this point that it's getting harder and harder for fantasy books specifically to alter my brain chemistry. If any of them were to go in that category, it would be book 2 because it was my favorite of the 3, and it probably gets close. Mostly because of The Fool. The Fool permanently altered my brain chemistry. Did the other characters? I don't know. But I hear that other books in the series might be even more up my alley, so I'm leaving the door open for a future book in this series to permanently alter my brain chemistry. But I loved the series. Check out that vlog if you're interested. Final 3 books I read in the year. First is H is for Hawk by Helen MacDonald, and this is a memoir that Helen wrote after losing their father. And I lost my dad in 2025, so this was very close to home. I'd read a collection of essays by Helen MacDonald, Vesper Flights, which I loved and gave 5 stars to. So I had this one on my radar, and then when my dad passed, I bought it as a little haul that I'd done of books that deal with grief that I wanted to eventually get around to. But I kept putting it off because grief is hard, and I wasn't quite ready to face someone else's grief, especially something, such a similar situation to my own. But I actually got a really cool opportunity, and I'll include the video actually at the end of this video in case you want to watch it. If not, you can just, click away. But I was asked to partake in a roundtable because H is for Hawk was turned into a film, and it actually came out in January, so you can watch it if you're interested, and I would recommend. It was incredible. And this was a roundtable with a few other creators and film critics and things, and we were able to interview and talk to the lead actress, the director, the screenwriter, and also Helen MacDonald themselves, the author of the memoir, who this whole story is about. And the story is a combination of Helen's processing of the grief of losing their father, but also they have, in the wake of their grief, they decide to adopt, to get a goshawk and to train the goshawk. And that's a whole experience that they're going through of training this hawk and building this relationship with the hawk as they process their grief. And it's kind of all tied up together. So I ended up reading it sooner than I maybe was ready to read it because I had the opportunity to do this roundtable. Like I said at the end of this video, I cut together my 2 questions and the answers for anyone who was interested. I'll also in the description link to the full video of the roundtable if that has been uploaded yet. I know that it hadn't been uploaded last time I checked, but maybe it's up now. And if so, I'll link that for you if you're interested. I was able to ask 2 questions. So if you watch to the end of this video, you can see my 2 questions and the answers from the creative team. I was kind of not quite ready, to be totally honest, to read this book. And when I first read it and when I finished it, I initially gave it 4 stars. And I think part of it is that I really wasn't ready to read it. I rushed a little bit. I'm still glad I read it because it was really great. And that was such a cool opportunity that I'll remember forever. And the movie was also really fantastic. I was able to see it early before this roundtable, but it was hard. It was a hard time. But with a little bit more perspective and thinking about it more, I have grown to really appreciate that I read it and to appreciate Helen's story even more. And so I've bumped it up to 5 stars. It should have been 5 stars from the start. I was in my feelings about it. Anyway, I'm going to put it into no notes. I don't read that many memoirs, but typically when I do, I find them quite moving. And this was definitely no different, but definitely even more so relevant to my life right now. And I really have enjoyed Helen MacDonald's work in the past with Vesper Flights. I think that they are a really talented writer and they were so vulnerable in telling their story here. And I just thought it was really moving and very emotional. And it was also very cool to learn about goshawks and to sort of see the process of that training as well. And the film focuses a little bit more on that, but also is definitely very much about grief. I needed a little bit more time to process it, I think. But yeah, as it's been a couple months now and I can appreciate it even more. And it definitely was a 5-star read. So that is H is for Hawk. And again, watch to the end of this video. We only have 2 more books to talk about, so you don't have that long to wait. And then you can, if you want, at the end, watch my interview questions as I talk directly to Claire Foy and to the director, Philippa Lothorpe, and to Helen MacDonald themselves, which was so cool. Unfortunately, I don't think Emma Donoghue, who is also an awesome author, I really enjoyed her book, Room. I don't think that she answered any of my questions, but she did answer other questions that other people asked. But anyway, it was a very cool opportunity, and I'm very grateful that they reached out. I still don't know how they found me and why, but it was very awesome. And then next I read Adrift in Currents Clean and Clear by Shauna McGuire. This is in the Wayward Children series, which are all novellas that are fantasy, and they're following children who come across random doors in places that doors shouldn't be. And when they go through them, they enter into some sort of a fantasy world that is sort of somehow tied to their interests or their personality, typically. And they're like little coming of age stories for kids that don't quite fit in their regular life through these sort of portal fantasy novellas. And I've really loved some of these, but I do feel like the last couple installments, one of the last couple installments was my favorite of the whole series, which was this one, Lost in the Moment and Found. This is my favorite, and I think it was number 7, maybe, or 8, something like that. But I do feel like a lot of the more recent books, more recent installments, are kind of losing the magic a little bit. And I felt that way about this one. We're following a girl who is adopted from Russia to the US, and she doesn't really fit in with her family, and they want her to be someone she isn't. And she goes through her door, and it's a sort of water world with giant turtles, but everything felt a little rushed and underdeveloped, and I didn't really connect to our main character. I feel like we didn't get to know her as well as past protagonists. And I also felt that the way this book ended sort of undid everything that came before, that made it feel a little bit like a waste of time. I just felt like this one missed the mark. It felt very rushed, and it didn't feel like it had as much heart as the past books. I don't know. It just didn't do it for me. For me personally, I don't know. I gave it 1 star, but I don't know if it quite goes in absolutely not. Maybe it goes in it's not you, it's me. It might also be you. It feels a little harsh to say absolutely not, but I don't know. I found it very disappointing, personally. And maybe it's just me, but also maybe it's the book a little bit. I don't know. Last but not least, maybe the weirdest book I read all year, Spread Me by Sarah Gailey. This is horror, but it's like erotic horror. I don't know. I probably should have known from the title. It didn't occur to me, honestly. I saw this book recommended in horror spaces. It didn't occur to me that it would have an erotic element. But again, in retrospect, that title should have given it away. This was a very strange book. Basically, this is a researcher who is working in the desert, and she and her team are out, collecting data, and they come across this entity that seems like it's dead. And they bring it into the lab because they're like, what is this thing? We have to analyze it and study it. And then the thing is not actually dead. And then things escalate. And our protagonist has a fetish I have never heard of and didn't know was a thing. So that's interesting, and it kind of is connected to this creature. So there's a bit of an element of, our protagonist trying to keep herself and her team safe from this entity that they thought was dead, but then also she's kind of attracted to it because of her particular fetish. So that was strange. I don't know. Again, I did not realize that this was going to be erotic horror, but again, that title should have given it away. Maybe I should have researched it more before I picked it up, but it was the last read of the year. It was halfway through December, and I just had it sitting there borrowed from the library as an audiobook. And I was like, maybe I'll just quickly read this horror novel to wrap up my reading for the year. I've heard about it before. It's pretty quick listen. And then I just couldn't look away for the rest of the book, Very strange, very horny, but I also found it pretty repetitive and kind of dragged out. It's pretty quick. It's not that long, but it just felt longer than it had to be. This could have been a short story, to be honest. I just think the way that it progressed, it was just sort of the same situation, the same plot happening again and again. And I think it was interesting to watch the protagonist deal with this combination of fear and attraction to this creature. It was it was something I've never read before, and I found it interesting, but I just think that the way it was executed was very repetitive and just the same dynamic again and again. It was just a bit one note, I guess, and like I said, a bit dragged out for the premise. And I liked the ending, actually, but by the time we got to the ending, I just was kind of tired of it. Like, I felt like the story had outstayed its welcome at that point. But again, maybe this just isn't for me. Again, I've never read something like this, so maybe it's just not my kind of horror. I don't know. So I'm going to put it into, it's not you, it's me. It might also be you. I don't know who I would recommend this to, but if you're into erotic horror, maybe you'll like this. It was very weird. So anyway, on that note, those are all the books I read in the last 3 months of the year, and that is my ranking. As you can see, many more books are in the 4 and 5 star areas than are in the 2 and 1 star, and only a couple 3 stars too. It was very heavily weighted towards books that I loved at the end of the year, which is great. I had so many 5 and 4 star reads. I think I had more 5 star reads even than 4 star reads, which is fantastic, and a pretty good mix of genres, but there were definitely a few books in there that weren't for me. So again, check out the description box for reading vlogs and end of year wrap-ups for more in-depth reviews of those books that I tried to be more concise about. Was I really that much more concise? I don't know. That's something I struggle with. But hopefully you enjoyed this format and enjoyed getting to hear about all the books I read at the end of the year, since I didn't get around to doing wrap-ups for them. I will get back into regular monthly, just speaking to camera wrap-ups in 2026. I say that I'm already halfway through February and I haven't done January yet, but that's mostly because I felt like I had to do this first and catch you up on the end of 2025 before I could get into 2026. So now that I've done this, I can get back into it. But like this video if you liked it. Let me know in the comments if you would want more tier ranking videos in the future. Videos like tier ranking every book I've ever given 5 stars, and if I still think they deserve 5 stars, or every horror book I've ever read, or every fantasy I've ever read, or something like that. Let me know. If you have specific recommendations or requests, leave those down below. And as always, in any wrap-up, please let me know your thoughts on any and all of the books mentioned. If you've read any of these, did you like them? Did you not? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? And if you have recommendations based on my reactions to these books, as always, leave them down below. I'm always taking recommendations and adding them to my Notion reading tracker, so I hopefully won't forget them. But that's it from me. I'm gonna go. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm Rebecca Shinsky. I'm the Chief of Staff of Book Riot and co-host of Zero to Well Read and the Book Riot podcast. I'm also a huge fan of this story. H is for Hawk has been one of my favorite books since before it was published, one of the great treats of working in publishing. And what a delight to have a chance to revisit Helen's story and to see it portrayed through this really terrific and just such a thoughtful adaptation. We're joined by Philippa Lothorpe, the writer and director of the film, Emma Donoghue, co-writer and novelist in her own right, Claire Foy, who plays Helen in the adaptation, and of course, Helen MacDonald, who gave us the gift of this story in the first place. Elizabeth, I believe you have a question for Claire about that interiority and translating it into a visual medium.
Yes, I do. I read the book and then watched the film. And I was wondering, for you and Philippa specifically, what were the challenges of adapting such an internal story of grief in isolation into a medium that doesn't allow us the same access as a book into Helen's thoughts and feelings, into that interiority? Was a narrator ever considered for this film? And also, was it a challenge to portray in those moments of very loud silence all of the racing and numbing thoughts that Helen would have been experiencing?
Very, very interesting question. And on the face of it, Helen's book is very interior. But when you reread it, it's also full of action and full of things happening. And so it's very easy to think it's just interior. It actually isn't. there's a lot to film. It's actually more action-packed than you think, which is a gift for us as filmmakers. So the narrative thread was really quite easy to pick out and then to make work with Emma. And I, our task was to try and make that work in as an immediate way as possible. But then our secret weapon for describing and illustrating that interiority is Claire. I worked with Claire on The Crown, so I had a knowledge of what Claire does in front of the camera. And Claire, you have this amazing ability to give us, the audience, a sense of the emotionality of what you're feeling and the interiority. And that's an extraordinary skill. Not many actors have that. And so Claire was our secret weapon to showing those things. So placing her in those situations of tension, of love, of mistake making, of all of those things, and watching Claire. That is our visual way of elucidating and illustrating that interiority. So we only could do it with her. I think.
I don't know about that.
It is true.
I think that's very generous of you. I think we talked a lot, myself and Philippa talked a lot about how to, and because I think by this point, I was very attached to the book. And I think that happens a lot with actors. When you have the original source material, I think it can be really frustrating for directors as well, because the film has to become its own thing. Like Helen said, it has to move and evolve, and it becomes like another organism. And I think that a lot of the time actors can just cling on to it like it's a Bible, because it gives you like a sense of, it's the interior world that you're trying to create inside yourself is basically a novel or a memoir. That's what that is. That's what acting basically is. And so I think that the challenge, and luckily I've been in a position of doing adaptations before and knowing that the way in is never to be telling the audience or showing the audience what the written word was. You have to boil that. My job as an actor is to boil that down. And also what was so incredible about Helen's memoir is Helen wrote, as you say, like in prose, what your emotions and thoughts and feelings were. But it's my job as an actor to interpret that, because we aren't self-aware as people. We don't go around understanding all our actions. And so as an actor, you have to know and then forget. It's sort of like a psychological kind of thing that you do. And also just don't patronize the audience. That's rule number one in any sort of filmmaking, I think, is just give them room to have their own thoughts and feelings about what you're doing, really.
I also think that the dance between, sorry, Helen.
No,
I was just going to say there's a dance that happens in order to capture that interiority between the camera, the actor, Claire, and the director. And if you have a really strong bond between those three people, you create the atmosphere and the situation on set to capture everything. And that's what happened on this particular programme. We had to do that because of our Hawk as well. But Charlotte Bruce Christensen, our DAP, had an instinctive sense of how to capture what Claire was showing us. And I wanted Claire to have the freedom to give us what she needed. So it was this wonderful dance between these three people that helped get that interiority out, I think. Sorry, Helen.
No, I'm butting in, I know, but I just want to say something that struck me so much when I watched the film, and that is that, when you're sitting with a goshawk, as Claire did in reality, making this film, there's no words. It's a wordless relationship in which you're having to read the tiny nonverbal cues of this creature, and you can't help but identify with it because there it is, and you're emotionally kind of caught up in it. And as a viewer of the film, it's this incredible triangulation that goes on where you start to identify with the hawk because Claire is, but also because Claire is also kind of wordless. It's all so beautifully kind of behind her eyes and so extraordinarily kind of portrayed that, that kind of weird wordless identification starts to become this weird triangle between you and the actor and the hawk. And it's so powerful. You get drawn into it. It's just magnificent. So it's not a film like I was sad, I got a cat, and then I was happy again. I always think of it more like a trip to the underworld with a bird that I become far too, I identify far too closely with before I can kind of pull back and see there's a real beautiful creature there that I'm almost not seeing because I'm seeing myself in her eyes. So that's kind of how I wrote the book, and the film also shows beautifully.
It really does. Elizabeth, you're interested in this topic as well.
Yeah, so I lost my father 6 months ago, so this was quite an emotional
Gosh.
an emotional book to read right now and to watch the film. And I thought it was portrayed beautifully, both in the book and in the film. It was very relatable in a painful way. But that made me think so much about how grief is, it's such a unique experience. There's this duality to grief. It feels like no one has ever felt what you're feeling, like no one could possibly understand. And yet every single person has felt grief. And there's this mundanity to it that's sort of affronting.
Yeah.
And you almost don't want to be comforted that people can relate to you as you're grieving. So I just kind of wanted to ask about what it was like to write the book, to make this film for all of you, if it felt like a catharsis in a way, if it felt like it allowed you to explore, heal from your grief in a way. And also, there was something you said in the book, Helen, about looking to books to help you through grief and that they weren't answers, and which I was kind of doing with your book here. But it made me wonder if books about grief aren't answers, maybe they're questions, and maybe they're mirrors to our own questions about grief. So it made me wonder if working on this project for any of you sort of helped focus you on a particular question about grief, or explore something in a deeper way, discover something, I guess.
I'll just say I'm so sorry to hear you lost your dad. I still miss mine terribly. He comes and goes, sort of sometimes he feels very present, sometimes he goes off to do something else, but he's still kind of very much around, which is a real comfort. Yeah, I mean, I wrote the book because I felt even at the end of that year that there was a story that was being played out with me and the bird that was much older and much bigger than me, and that it'd be good to write it down. Basically, it was a story that I thought needed to be told. And it's true that, it is the loneliest possible state to be in, despite being one of absolute ubiquity. It's such a paradoxical thing. But I think, we're getting better at holding, I feel like I'm being very Californian here in a joyful way. We're getting better at holding space for discussing grief, and to just sort of sharing how bad it is. And I know that many people who were involved with the film had also suffered their own losses. Philippa, I think was very important to you when you were writing and directing as well.
Absolutely. Like you, Elizabeth, my dad had died just 6 months before I encountered Helen's book, and it was overwhelmingly moving to read, but also to spend time with Helen, having a cry, wasn't it? And
We did.
When you told me the story, Helen, of Christina saying all shall be well and all shall be well and all manner of things shall be well, which is the end of the film, and when Christina comes round to help Helen come back into the world, really. I remember thinking that was so profound. I thought that's got to go at the end of the film, and we've got to have a scene saying that. And then when we were filming it, Claire's portrayal of Helen and Denise Goff's beautiful portrayal of Christina was so moving. I could barely direct them. I had to keep going and crying in the corner. I found it so overwhelming. I'm thinking, what the hell? I'm absolutely fine. My dad died 7 years ago now, 6 years ago. But you just get mugged by that feeling sometimes, don't you? And I think that's why the film seems to reach so many people in the viewings, in the screenings that we've had. And Helen and I have been there with Claire doing Q&As, and people have come up afterwards and poured their hearts out to us, haven't they?
Yeah.
Of their response to the film, but also their memories or their feelings of their own grief. And it gives you a profound connection with other people. So I feel like, to you, Elizabeth, now I'm thinking, oh my goodness, poor you. I know how you feel. And it just gives you this feeling of connectedness, even though Helen's story is of training the hawk, and it goes into this other space. But there's something really important about that hawk. And I know you did it in real life, Helen, but maybe you can speak about it. It's that mythic quality of the hawk, which gives it a kind of universality beyond your particular story, which is very, very profound. And Mabel comes to represent something bigger than she really is, doesn't she? What is that? What is that feeling?
Well, I mean, one could give, it's sort of the wordless. I mean, she's. I mean, to be blunt, hawks are death. They're death dealers. But also, they're cute, weird, beautiful, strange animals that like to play. you know. So
but they're ancient too, aren't
but they're
they?
very ancient, and I think one of the things about hawks that's interesting is because they've never been domesticated, that, you know, Mabel is exactly the same as a goshawk that would have been trained by someone 5,000 years ago. They don't change. They're the same. They're kind of like history handed down, as it were, in a way. But also, you know, I'm going to give away a sort of sense, you know, Claire was saying earlier about the sort of weird spiritual sense that one gets sometimes in the presence of these creatures. And I think it's no mistake that they've been associated with the human soul for thousands and thousands of years. If you go back to lots and lots of cultures, for example, in Central Asia, you know, the souls of warriors were thought to be reborn as birds of prey, you know, the souls of children that were unborn. You know, there's this constant sense that hawks are a way to communicate between where we are and whatever there is up there. They're a kind of a go-between. And that I think is something I didn't really push too hard in the book, but there's definitely a sense that they trade. They're a kind of I don't know, a kind of broker between those two realms. And that is, I think, part of the film's power, is that you can see that when you watch it.
There's
Emma,
something
what
that
was
Helen, oh, sorry, I was just going to say there's one line that always stuck with me, and I've thought about it every day of the filming. The line, Helen, that you wrote, I wanted to fly with the hawk to bring my father home. I don't think I've quoted it properly.
Yeah. I would fly with my hawk to find my father and bring him home.
Bring him home.
Yeah.
And that felt so deep to me. I also carried Helen gave me some of Mabel's actual feathers, which I kept inside the book and carried around with me. I didn't tell the crew this, but I had Mabel's feathers in my bag every day of filming. Yes. It was like this beautiful talisman. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I kept Mabel's feathers with me every single day of the filming, even when I was doing the Hawk unit stuff on my own with just Lloyd. And I don't know. I know that's probably silly, but it's not silly. I feel very connected.
It's very scary, and it makes one feel very vulnerable talking about such things. But, you know, there is these are the sort of the deepest and most grounding parts of the human experience, and, you know, it's hard to talk about them without sounding a bit woo-woo. But, you know.
But that's why I didn't tell I was carrying Mabel in my bag.
I don't know. I've heard a lot of weird things that writers have done, and this is not too high on the list. I'm glad
that we're not as eccentric as some. That's good.